Welcome to the latest Paper Street Pictures Roundtable. My name is Becky Sayers. You might recognize me as one half of the Paper Street Pictures podcast, but if I'm a stranger to you, that's okay. Let me introduce myself. I am an independent filmmaker and also just generally a horror movie lover. I especially love slasher movies, and I think that's why the crew at Paper Street thought I might make a good host for this particular roundtable, because we're talking about Ti West's latest film, X. But I'm not alone. I have some friends here to help make this discussion more lively. Here to join me at the metaphorical roundtable are three awesome people. Let me introduce them. We have Meagan Navarro. She is the head critic and chief content creator for Bloody Disgusting, as well as co-host of the Bloody Disgusting podcast. Hey, Meagan.
Hello, thank you for having me.
And we have Trace Thurman. Trace is a writer and critic for Bloody Disgusting as well, and he's the co-host of the Horror Queers podcast.
Hello!
Hello! And last but certainly not least, we have Anya Stanley, who is a columnist for Fangoria and a contributor at Slash Film.
Hello.
Welcome, friends. I'm so glad all four of us are talking. I think the last time we all saw each other in person was probably at Fantastic Fest a couple years ago, or at least all of us together collectively. I've seen Trace.
I've seen you. I saw Megan last week for South by. Anya, it has been far too long.
Yeah, I think the last time was at a Fantastic Fest.
Probably so.
Yeah. Yeah, it has been a while.
Well, we're going to try and replicate, I guess, kind of that walking out of a movie theater and just chatting about movies experience here. So let's first, before we get into all the details of X, kind of set the stage for where our heads were at going into this movie. So there was a lot of anticipation about the return of Ti West to the horror genre. His last horror film was The Sacrament from back in 2013. So I'm kind of curious, were you all excited about this movie? Are you a big fan of Ti West's filmography? And just to remind people, like, Ti West got to start with a low budget film called The Roost back in 2005. And then he rose to a prominence with a huge run of films. I think 3 of them were in 2009, including House of the Devil, Cabin Fever 2, and The Innkeepers. And there's a few other films here and there and some other short contributions to anthologies. So yeah, let's talk about, are you Ti West fans? What were your thoughts before you went into X?
I just want to say, he has disowned Cabin Fever 2, but I really enjoy Cabin Fever 2.
I do too. I know, it's almost like, should we mention? But he is still credited, so.
It is not Alan Smithy. He still directed it as much as he wishes he didn't.
His signature's all over that movie, except for the ending, pretty much.
Yes, to answer your question though, I am a huge Ti West fan, so I was super stoked to watch this movie.
Yeah. How about you, Anya?
Yes, a big Ti West fan, to the point where knowing that he was involved with the movie and the title of the movie was all I needed to know to get on board. And I saw glimpses of the trailer here and there throughout social media, but I actively tried to avoid watching the trailer. I wanted to go in as blind as possible. And it paid off. It paid off very well.
Question for y'all, actually, because leading up to this, I had seen the trailer, but I kept thinking when I was watching, I was like, I am so excited for this because it doesn't look like your typical A24 movie, and it doesn't look like your typical Ti West movie. So it was both of those. I was like, and maybe I'll disagree and y'all can speak to that, but I was like, it feels like I'm excited to have these two things, A24 and Ti West, delivering something that I feel like is just out of their wheelhouse. I mean, not to say Ti West couldn't deliver something like this. It's just, it wasn't being presented like your like House of the Devil or The Innkeepers.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, because I feel like A24 and Ti West were kind of the perfect marriage, because Ti West was kind of that kicked off a lot of what people later called elevated horror. Boo-boo, I know, a bad term. But like A24 is known for that, right? And then Ti West, when he initially started, a lot of people were like, oh, this guy's like this intellectual that does horror movies. So I think it was an interesting, like it finally made sense for them together. And I think for me with Ti West's filmography, his movies are all pretty different from one another. like you have a found footage movie, you have House of the Devil, which is a very cinematic 80s experience. The Roost is like super indie do-it-yourself kind of thing. So for me, I always come into a Ty West movie like, I want to be surprised. So to me, I was like, I wasn't shocked to see this movie with his name on it.
Yeah, he's kind of done a lot of different things with each sandbox he plays in. So with the Innkeepers, it's kind of a ghost story, but he really plays around with a lot of the elements. And the same thing with the House of the Devil. That's an entire era of exploitation films that, again, he messed around with and didn't quite do it right, Yeah. But for the better. And X is kind of the same way. There's a lot of stuff there's a lot of weird rule breaking that works very, very well.
Yeah, I was also super excited. And I think, Meagan, you might have been the one that sent this to me a long time ago, because you knew I was a fan of an artist named Chelsea Wolfe, who worked on the music for it. She's a doom metal artist, and that's totally my jam. And I was a big fan of hers. And then when I found out she was working on a Ty West movie, I was like, are you kidding? This is made for me. So it sounds like we were all pretty stoked. And I think the horror crowd, whether you're a fan of Ty West or not, was all probably admittedly curious about what this movie was. So
100%, yeah.
And just to warn people at home, from here on out, there may be spoilers. Hard to talk, in my opinion, hard to talk about this movie without them. Hard to have a meaningful discussion. So if you haven't seen it, stop, go see it, and then come back and finish this. I don't think you'll regret watching it, even if you don't like it, because it's a fun movie to think about and talk about. So let's get into our viewing experiences. It premiered at South by, and then about a week later, or even the same week actually, had a full theatrical release.
Yeah.
Trace and Meagan, did you see it at South by, either like virtually or at
we saw it together.
Yeah, we sat next to each other at the premiere.
But I did go see it again. I saw it again this past Sunday because I had a lot of expectations for what I was thinking the movie was doing that it didn't do. And it clouded my judgment on a first watch, which is on me. It's on me, like that's me bringing expectations into a film. And I wanted to watch the movie again on its own terms. But yes, Meagan, speak to your first viewing of this movie.
I was stoked on it. I mean, I was stoked going in, and I did think that it was going to be something a little different plot wise, but then you watch it and you're like, oh no, this is totally a Ty West movie, and I totally get it. And I just was head over heels from it from the jump, really. So
And for you, Anya, did you see it in the theater then?
Yes, I did. And because I'm mom of the year, I always take my oldest son, who's 14 now. I always take him with me to see any horror movie, and X was no exception. And he knew what the plot was about. And I told him there was probably going to be nudity and whatnot. And he was like, as long as you don't mind sitting next to your mom watching boobs, then, I'm not going to make it weird if you don't make it weird. And we did. So I went and saw it in the theater opening weekend with my 14-year-old son, which we'll get into. That was the reactions between the two of us during certain scenes was something to behold. It was pretty interesting.
Ooh, I am very curious about that. I'll try to compete with you for Mom of the Year, but I think my 8-year-old's still a little young for X.
Yeah.
But maybe someday she'll get there. She has watched a lot of maybe things that other parents would question because but whatever they're interested in. And I think it's better to watch it with them and experience it with them and be able to have a conversation about it. How did the crowds react? I also saw it in the theater, by the way. I saw it at an Alamo Draft House, and you could tell the crowd was really amped up to see it. It was a perfect kind of late night movie. I feel like just the pairing of porn and horror, sex and violence is a really great late night sort of movie. How did the crowds react at your respective viewings?
Ours were foaming at the mouth to get in the door to begin with, and that carried through the entire crowd. I mean, it was a very loud, it was probably the best type of crowd you could see this movie with.
And to put in perspective, like at South by, there's two main theaters. Like there's a couple, but there's two main ones. There's the Paramount and there's the Stateside right next door. And the Paramount can hold like almost 3,000 people, whereas the Stateside holds like 300 to 500 people. Yeah. And they put X in the smaller one, the 300 person theater, intentionally so to build buzz, because they also had like, you know, free screenings throughout the week on Monday.
Yeah.
But people, yeah, apparently they had to call the cops because people that were being turned away who were in line for 2 hours before the movie were like trying to get in the theater. Like it was that kind of thing.
Yeah, it was practically a mob of people bum rushing trying to get in that door. They wanted to see this movie. I hope those people showed up and paid for tickets, because this is the type of movie that deserves that kind of support.
And I went to go see it again this past Sunday night. It was 7:30 Sunday night at the Draft House as well, but like it was like 3/4 full with a really good crowd. So of course I had already seen the box office results from that Sunday, and I was like, I'm surprised the theater's this full, but yay, I'm glad it is.
Yeah, same here. It was a pretty full crowd at a mall theater that I went to, and a good bit of that a good quarter of that, I'd say, were teens who were very clearly movie hopping, who came in like super late, and they had no idea what they got into, and so it was a very entertaining show on screen and off.
So they weren't annoying then. They were entertaining to have in the room.
They came in right when the killing started.
Oh,
and so I guess it shut them up, and these teens that, like, I saw one of them pull out their phone briefly to answer like a text or something, and then that was it. They were quiet as mice for most of the movie until certain scenes came up again that we'll talk about, where they were very repulsed, and they let us know.
Yeah, and I think that's probably speaks to the power of the movie, that it can get teenagers to shut up and not look at their phones. It is a pretty compelling film.
Really interesting though, considering, well, I mean, I know they weren't there for the sex part of it, but considering the amount of sex.
Oh, there were, yeah.
The amount of elderly sex in it, like which again, I'm not laughing at it, but I'm surprised that we don't have a bunch of teenagers sitting there. Ew, old people, naked bodies, fucking.
That was my son.
Okay, well, there you go.
So yes, there were
a couple here and there. Yeah, you could hear my son's just disgusted as he's crunching his popcorn. Just
lots of shifting in seats, grimacing on people. You could like hear people like during that. Oh, we're gonna get to that scene as well as talk about the sex in the movie. So the film, you know, heading in, I think everyone was comparing it to Texas Chainsaw Massacre. So I want to talk about that for a bit, because that was what was in my head going in. And at first I was like, yeah, I could see this. Obviously, it takes place in 1979, which is a couple years after Texas Chainsaw Massacre was shot. It, you know, has a lot of similar aesthetics, and it starts off similarly plot-wise, right? Where you have a group of young people in a van
in Texas.
But that's, to me, really where, like, from a plot perspective, they start to differ. I mean, there's maybe some similarities, but it reminded me, though, that it's like, all right, there's a lot of other 70s horror to pull from, and like visually and like tonally, I actually found there was a lot of like, I was getting a lot of Hammer horror vibes, strangely, like with the gothic score and the wide framing of a lot of the shots of, like, instead of a farmhouse, you know, a castle. And I was surprised how much I was thinking about that instead of Texas Chainsaw, though there's Tobe Hooper's marks are all over it, clearly. I was curious for you all, like, were you getting all TCM vibes, or were you feeling all sorts of other horror inspirations as well?
Yeah, I kind of felt like a little bit of a hodgepodge. Like, I think that it's the problem with your iconic horror movies is that's the automatic default people's minds go to. So it's like, oh, Texas and a van in rural Texas, and, you know, in the 70s, Texas Chainsaw. If he had said it in, you know, somewhere else, if he had said it in a camp in New Jersey, we'd automatically be like, oh, Friday the 13th. But I was getting more kind of like Wes Craven, to be honest, just that early kind of not really nihilistic, but like the dark, gritty, but with the sense of humor that was just pure Craven for me is
like
a lot
Hills
of what
Have
I got.
Eyes, Last House on the Left.
But with his later kind of sense of humor blended into that.
I got a lot of like the people under the stairs. I got the humor especially reminded me of some Larry Cohen stuff.
Yeah, I can see that.
Just because it was just so visceral and making fun of it the whole time, in such a way that people were uncomfortable. I like that discomfort. I like being uncomfortable in a horror movie. I love it so much. If it's done well, if it's done with for good reason. And yeah, I think this was perfectly uncomfortable.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have any specific film like references for you. I mean, outside, you know, like again, Texas Chainsaw is pretty obvious, but it for a reason. I think, you know, you can see Eaten Alive in there, you can see some Fulci in there, but also like I don't know, like it speaks to a specific like period of films, obviously, but I kept seeing people complaining like, oh, it wasn't very scary, and I was kind of like, I don't know if the film's trying to scare you per se. To me, this is how I describe it. It's having fun, but it literally has its finger like under your butt on your butthole, just waiting to like prod you. And that can be like exciting and scary, but it's not like, I don't feel like the movie's ever really trying to scare me. But that being said, there were times when I'm like, because we have that overhead shot of the alligator, you know, 30 minutes into the movie.
Right.
So every time someone is near the water, you're just like, ah!
I'm sorry. Who do we have to email to get Trace Thurman? This movie will tickle your taint on the cover box.
Like, you know what I mean? Like, do y'all think this movie is like one of the scariest movies you've ever seen? Do you think it's like a legitimately scary movie outside of a movie that is in good spirits, having fun with you? Well, I kind of consider like the cinematic equivalent.
Slasher.
Yeah, like it's fun, scary. It's like like you scream and you laugh about it later, but I'm not like chilling in my bones right now.
No. Yeah. If you're going into it looking to be like shaken to your core, it's probably not going to happen. But it's not trying to do that anyway.
No.
And like you said, and there's it's like, well, I lost my train of thought there, but I think that it's I completely blanked out on what I was going to say. I had like a quarter of a sentence coming out and then it's just gone.
Well, I think you nailed it earlier with what you were saying about it's uncomfortable. And there's some horror. Yeah, that's terrifying.
I remember.
Go. Okay, go. Before it goes away again.
Like Trace was saying, it's not so much that there are a couple of jump scares in there, but it's more dread building. And it what Ti West does effectively is tease you with certain kills, especially with the water. Like that alligator kill is teased twice before someone actually is dispatched in the area.
Which I, on a second watch, I was like, oh my God, he telegraphs this, because when they walk out of the strip bar in Houston, it's the whole mural on the side of the building is an alligator biting the panties of a woman who has the exact same haircut as Brittany Snow's character.
That's brilliant. See, that's what you get on a second viewing.
Yeah.
That's what I wanted to ask, if anybody got the license plate of the car that was in the water of the second viewing. Okay.
Oh no, it's probably
an Easter egg of some kind.
Something. Yeah, you're probably right. But I do think, what you said, Ti West is very effective. One at foreshadowing, building dread, and he's just a very patient filmmaker, which we saw in The House of the Devil for sure, right? Like not a lot actually happens in that movie for a long time, similarly to
so, y'all's piece on this though, because I love House of the Devil, but that is a movie that I won't show just anyone, because that is an easy movie for people to be like, well, that's really boring. I don't feel that I feel comfortable showing X to anyone, because while the killing or like the standard of what you expect from a slasher film is delayed until past the hour mark of the film, I never for once think that a general audience member would find this movie boring up until the killing starts.
Yeah.
No, there's plenty of other things to keep you entertained. Humor, sex, and just his sense of like building tension, like we talked about. And I think it's not even just, from a scripting perspective and a pacing or foreshadowing, it's also just the dissonance, which, going back to the whole TCM influence, the kind of, there was Texas Chainsaw has this, very experimental score, right? That's got, non-traditional items used in instrumentation that really sounds very dissonant. and makes you kind of on edge. And
Right.
there was a few times where I saw kind of that coming into play, or just even in the strobe editing, right, that you see where there's like little flashes of back and
I
forth.
love that freaking editing.
Yes.
I learned the name of it. It's called a stutter cut.
Yes.
But yeah, the whole time I was like, this, because that is the, to get film fucking school freaky on you, like that is the visual language of cinema telling you something is not right. Things shouldn't be transitioning this way. I am immediately on edge because of how this is being done.
Yeah.
I do want to talk a little more about cinematography, but before we go on to that, I was just a question while we were talking about the influences. I've never seen Debbie Does Dallas. Has anybody seen it? I'm curious if there's any like influence from that film that maybe made its way, other than they reference it several times right there. They're trying to make The Farmer's Daughter is the movie that they're making, and they're trying to follow that success and chase it. But I was curious if any of the aesthetics kind of translate. I don't know if anybody's seen it or knows anything about it,
but now I'm gonna watch it.
I know.
The Farmer's Daughters is also an existing adult film from the 70s.
Oh,
so
really?
like it does not have the same plot, but it is the name of an adult film. So I feel like I don't have the same knowledge. I feel like Ty West has seen a lot of 70s porn, which good for him. I couldn't.
You just get that feeling from him,
right? I honestly, like, I haven't seen it either, so I could be wildly off base here. But to me, having interviewed him afterwards, it never really struck me that he was pulling from specific influences, especially in that department, so much as this was a way to covertly sneak in his love letter to filmmaking and the craft of filmmaking. Yeah. And it's like doing a horror movie seemed too on the nose, it'd be too meta. It's been done. But the adult filmmaking seemed like a really good entry point, not just the way that he's so committed to recreating like a period, which he's done, in House of the Devil, but it's also like a really good entry point for an audience perspective. Yeah. So it's like, it's new, but it's also like, I think it's easy for a mainstream audience. It's a lot easier to get in on because there's so much craft in this movie that's impressive. That, if you were doing an avant-garde cinema, like the filmmaker RJ Owen Campbell, he's talking French wave cinematography. If you were to do that, you're going to lose a mainstream audience. But porn, we understand that and we connect with that. Funnily enough.
I mean, and from the opening shot, in which, I mean, again, you think you're looking at a 16 millimeter aspect ratio, and it's just the sides of the barn or the house they're in. It immediately visually communicates to you, like, this is not what you think it's going to be.
Yeah. I love that you brought that up, because that was my very first thought on that opening because of the way it was framed. Like, oh, okay, are we looking, a 4:3, something shot on 16 millimeter? And that's kind of a perfect segue into the cinematography. So this film does legitimately look like it was shot on film. And I was, reading that they had put some filtering over it. They basically defocused it so that it's slightly fuzzy to kind of mimic the look of film, which is interesting.
Yeah, give it that grain.
Oftentimes, like things look very sharp, right, digitally. But I was curious, did you feel it was effective? Because for a while, there was a lot of films, in the grind, when they were trying to mimic the Grindhouse era, right, with like Planet Terror and Death Proof coming out, where a lot of people were just like putting on the cigarette burn filters and the grain, and then it kind of got very pastiche very quickly.
Even Flanagan's Ouija prequel has the cigarette burns on it. Like he even does like. Yes.
And I like the Ouija prequel quite a bit. That one's great. But sometimes it comes across very cheesy. Did you feel like this was well executed in that regard? Or did it ever feel like you're leaning too hard into this 70s aesthetic with your graininess and your wide angles and, the soft focus?
Maybe because I'm such a Ty West fan, that I never really felt like that. I maybe I give him too much credit, but I think he does something so well with recreation that he's intentionally not trying to do pastiche, and maybe that's why I feel like this was a little bit more restrained than your average art house. Like he's more interested in the techniques, and recreating, like the opening is them in Houston, and they shot this in New Zealand, but I live in Houston and that looks like the ship channel. It is accurate.
Sure shit does.
Yeah, and that's his kind of motif, or you really what he does, his approach is not to do what the commercials say. That's not what like media's vision of the 70s is. It's what is authentically the 70s. And to marry that with an almost kind of modern style is like very distinctly West. So it didn't feel pastiche for me, probably for all of those reasons.
Yeah, for me, it worked because that grain, that texture, it was a heavy part of both lowbrow forms of entertainment that he was highlighting in the movie. It worked just fine for me. And sometimes grain can work very well for a movie, and sometimes the lack of it in a movie that's sort of using the aesthetics of that era. Are you already anticipating that I'm going to talk about Texas Chainsaw Massacre here?
Sure.
not the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, not Tobe Hooper's. I'm talking about the new one. That
Wait. The new one isn't the one that just came out, or like the remake with Jessica Biel? Okay.
No, the new one that just came out. Ooh,
he was about to come to blows.
Well, no, because, look. I because I love the remake with Jessica Biel, and it shares the same cinematographer as the original. But he specifically didn't want to do grain because he was like, I already shot this movie one way. Why would I want to do it again the exact same way? So anyway, continue.
No, as a fellow fan of the Platinum Dunes remake, like I'm into that, and it works, and it's still rough and tumble and scary, and that one is actually scary. That scared the hell out of me.
It is a good fucking movie.
Anyway, we're talking about the wrong movie. Okay. But yeah, the grain and that texture, and I don't remember too many like film blooms on the screen, but I definitely remember because I'm not using the word enough, the grain of the film. And it fits. It fits with everything, and it's not too heavy. There's not like a moment in the film where where you can see the splicing that happens, or you can see like, there's none of that gimmicky stuff. It just fits.
Well, and I think that gimmicky stuff, like, because I mean, and Grant, I love Grindhouse, but like, it's a gimmick there, like what they're doing. Right. But I also think that with filmmakers like Ty West, when they're doing this kind of deep cut stuff that only people like us who really study and follow film are going to notice, I think there's a thing where it's like, oh, that's really fucking pretentious. Like fuck that filmmaker, like, and all of his shit. But I don't get that vibe from any of Ty West's work. And specifically in X, I just feel like this is a guy having fun. And if you get some of the stuff, you get it. But if you don't, it doesn't hurt the viewing experience for you.
Right. It's not to the detriment of the storytelling or the visuals at all.
Mm-hmm. Yep. The film works on its own regardless. And I agree with you. I think it was successful in the aesthetic, but I was curious, and I haven't seen too many people complaining about it for the most part, but inevitably there will be people that are like, eh. But I think it's
when it hits streaming, just you wait. Yeah. This wasn't that good.
You overhyped it.
It didn't scare me. Yeah.
Yep.
Exactly. All right, so I want to talk more about the plot and the story here with some of the twisting of the tropes that happen in this. So first of all, I think the cast of characters, like pretty much all of them in some ways have moments where they defy your expectations of what you think, how you think they're going to be. Typically in slashers, you get kind of, obviously you have the final girl.
Your archetypes.
Often, the virginal archetype. But then a lot of the other, basically cannon fodder in the film, the people that are going to die are often like, they're jerks, right? Like, and it's part of like the justification, almost like they deserve to die, so that the viewer can maybe enjoy their death more. But one of the things that first struck me is every character, they kind of had their own motivations and reasons for doing what they were doing. And it wasn't malicious, and they have all these opportunities where they could be jerks, they could be mean to each other, the mean to the old couple in the house, and are actually pretty caring and kind towards them for the most part. RJ is probably the biggest exception and the only person that maybe comes across as a jerk. But
and I have thoughts about that because because while I agree, I'm like, during the conversation where Jenna Ortega's character is asking, is getting curious. Yes, you're like, dude, you're a fucking hypocrite. Like, what is it? At the same time, as someone who has
a kid.
Well, but as someone who has a bit of experience with open relationships, like, that's maybe not something you want to bring up in front of a group of people.
Yeah.
If you're talking about opening up your relationship. And at the same time, like, if you say, cool, we're going to be open, and then you let your partner go off and fuck someone, and you have feelings, like you get jealous, or those are normal, rational feelings that in an open relationship, you have to be willing to have those discussions about. So I get the point, like that scene where you're like, oh, like, fuck RJ. But at the same time, like, I get it. I get it. So it doesn't make his character less likable for me when I'm watching that scene.
I think it's, for me, the fact that he did not, the way he treated her in the beginning of the film, he didn't say what they were doing, which is really messed up, to bring your young girlfriend with you on a road trip with strangers and not tell her that they're making an adult film. Like, I would immediately be uncomfortable and be like, screw you, dude, we're done.
Especially if you know that she's not the type of person that would have gone along with that.
Yes.
But this is what makes this movie a large component of what makes this movie so special for me, because these are very complex, lived-in characters that you can dissect specific moments, and each of them feel like they have complete arcs and, like Becky said, motivations. You actually like or are deeply invested in what happens to them when stuff happens, and that makes the impact of what happens really hit. It's not really like trying to scare you, but man, if you don't feel those deaths, you know, when it happens, I mean, I think our audience was ready to revolt when, you know, certain character that everybody was deeply attached to gets it. And that's rare, and it's rare in a slasher. I feel like it's not very common in the genre space at all, because, like Becky was saying, they're supposed to be fodder for the most part, so we can just write them off.
And that's kind of the thing, right? I mean, if I have like a big gripe, I have some gripes, but like my biggest thing is I'm like, oh, I wanted more time with X character before they died.
And it's an hour in when they start dying.
Yes. Oh, when Brittany Snow, Mia Goth is great.
It's okay. Spoilers. Turn away.
Brittany Snow is like, I was like, why aren't you doing roles like this all the time? This is so awesome. Please keep doing this. I love this character, because again, in any other movie, Bobby Lynn would be the slut that gets killed very early. And she gets this moment in that conversation where she's talking about like just sex. Again, love is what's important. Sex is the equivalent to a game of checkers, essentially, in her mind. And that's great. I mean, people won't agree with whatever. I hate that is the end of her until her death scene, because I want more time with her. And that's not really a problem that the film has. It's more so the film did such a good job of endearing me to this character that when she dies, I'm like, no!
You and the entire audience. That theater,
I think the way that Ty West actually subverted all these characters and their tropes is simply by spending more time with them individually. Like Brittany Snow, we meet her as the slut. She's a star of the movie, and she's wearing her cute that adorable little red romper with the wedges. I'm going to replicate that exact outfit this summer. You're going to see all my cellulite, all my stretch marks, but I'm going to look so cute. Oh my God.
You will.
I cannot wait to do that. I'm going to do a roller set too. I'll do the whole thing.
Please do.
But yeah, I think that she, in particular, you meet her and then immediately she gives a film tip to the avant-garde film guy. She says, you know, I know that you're trying to do new wave, but let's remember this is a porn movie. If you angle it this way, it's going to look like his dick is filling the tank.
She knows her shit. Yeah.
She knows her shit. She's been around the block a couple times. She knows what she's doing. And, you know, other movies wouldn't have done that. Same thing with RJ. He's a jerk in some respects, but then you also get that moment where he's losing his shit in the shower and he's crying for a long time. The camera holds for quite a while. You're going to sit with it and you're going to sit with his discomfort and it's going to be your discomfort. This happens with every single character, even the old couple. You have this moment where they're sitting on the bed and they're talking to each other, and she, Pearl, she's like, just tell me I'm pretty, man. Like, that's all I need.
She wants to be desired.
Yes.
Everybody wants that. It's a version of the sex slasher trope.
Okay, so on my second watch, okay, so I'll just throw this out there, and because Meagan witnessed this. I was underwhelmed on my first viewing because I kept waiting for the other shoe to drop, narratively speaking, where I was like, okay, cool, what's their grandmaster plan? I was like, cool, they're gonna skeleton key Mia Goth. They're gonna we're transferring our souls into her body because that's what this is doing.
Yes.
And I was so invested in this is what's happening. Or if it's not that, there is something else happening. That it was blinding me to anything else, like any themes that were coming up in the film. So when it ended, I was like, oh, I'm a little disappointed because there's nothing to this. Like, it is just old horny people that are killing people because they're mad about it. They're mad that they can't have sex. They're mad these young people can have sex. On a rewatch, knowing what it was, and this is what I was trying to say before we started recording, where I was like, there's not really any narrative surprises, because I think if you just say this happens, this happens, this happens, this happens, it's pretty standard, par for the course with this type of film. That being said, I found an unexpected tenderness between the old couple of Pearl and Harold that I was not catching on a first viewing, that I was kind of like, I really do like what he's doing with this. Yes. But at the same time, we can talk about it later, where I'm like, I also feel like there's kind of some gaps here that the prequel that has been made already is going to fill. And that upsets me a little bit because I feel like the film should stand on its own without me having to be like, well, maybe the prequel will answer this question.
Yeah, I definitely see where you're coming from with that for sure. And the tenderness you're talking about, I really love the scene where Brittany Snow's character is singing Landslide. And it's a little on the nose maybe with lyrically, but that song, like, I cry every time I hear that song, no matter what. So it was just like, oh, it's so sweet. Even like, wait, I found it sweet and tender and kind. And yet I found myself empathizing more with the villains of the film, just as a result of something that simple, as well as kind of the whole conversation, Trace, that you referenced, and then the relationship between Howard and Pearl.
Yeah, going in, I was definitely expecting, kind of like Trace, I was expecting like an Elizabeth Bathory kind of situation. I thought that she was gonna kill me, or not, maybe not kill Mia Goth, but like, use the youth to kind of like make herself younger or something like that. I thought something like that was gonna happen, but what ended up happening made me freaking cry. It's something to go into the movie as a 36-year-old having 2 kids whose body is not like it used to be, and realizing that beauty, which is a big currency for a lot of women, to see that fading. And then with that, the Landslide song absolutely made me cry. I cried in a horror movie, y'all. I cried in a horror movie.
It happens.
I do all the time.
It happens. Yeah, so do I.
I had a little tear streaming during Landslide, just watching these two, the old couple and the younger people, all just devastated at slipping away youth and losing the currency you once had.
That's why the simplicity is so deceptive. It reads as narratively straightforward, but you dissect all of these little moments, and there's a lot underneath the surface.
Yeah. Plus, it was insidious as hell for Ty West to use Landslide, which is going to make me cry anyway.
Yes, exactly.
Y'all are going to laugh at me so hard. Literally, I don't know music. And when I heard that, I was like, I know this song. But I was like, didn't some pop princess sing this in like the mid 2000s? and so I Googled it and I was like, oh, fuck, it's Fleetwood Mac.
It's not
no disrespect
to
Stevie Nicks.
Oh, my
God. I know Tusk, and that's about it.
So I also liked, though, with Pearl's character, that it's kind of the inverse of the slasher trope of, you have a lot of slasher movies that have like the man who can't control himself around the tempting young woman. Like she's kind of like the reverse of Russ Thorne in Slumber Party Massacre, right? Where it's just like, oh, these young women are tempting me. And instead, it's very unusual to have a woman, let alone an older woman, be kind of the source of that kind of, I guess, sexuality that needs to be tamed or restrained by her husband. So I found that really neat, that it's often in movies like women covering up for their son or their husband who are doing who is like perversions or whatever it might be. But this was the opposite.
But it's also like, normally you'd have a villain that was motivated by sexual repression. And in this case, it's not that. It's that she is, they want to have sex. They just can't because of her husband's health.
But they do, well, those two, like that's also the how far Wes kind of takes that, you know, that single image of the man with his pants around his ankles in the basement is
her sex toy.
Freaking dark when you unpack that moment. So it kind of adds some tension, at least it did for me. It's like, well, what is she going to do with, you know, Maxine, Mia Goth's character?
She has to get her release by killing. And that's exactly how the scene with RJ plays out. It plays out kind of like a sex scene in certain respects.
Right. Lots of penetration, repeated penetration.
Sex and violence.
She gets on top of him in the same exact position that Brittany Snow is in earlier. It's very clear. And later on, when she is kind of like snuggling up with Mia Goth in bed, and she puts her hand on her and kind of, there's a little bit of blood that gets on her. The blood is actually in the same exact spot where Brittany Snow was wiping off the semen on her back too. It was on the lower right flank.
When I tell you, I cheered in my head when I was watching Brittany Snow wipe Kid Cudi's cum off of her back. I was like, good for you, movie. Good for you. But because the body in the basement, though, how do y'all, because I read that as, okay, this is her sex toy. Her sex toy that she can play with, since Harold can't do anything for her.
Right.
And so I was, on a first watch, I was confused. It's like, well, they keep saying, oh, Maxine is the one. She doesn't like blondes. Okay, well, they're going to skeleton key her. They're not. I'm really stuck on skeleton key. But I love the idea, again, because the old couple is essentially another open relationship where it's like Harold cannot provide for her in the way that she needs sexually. So he assists her in kidnapping people to play with in their basement.
Yes.
Like, fascinating.
Which is why it's like she obviously coveted this, you know, Mia Goth's character that reminded of her for obvious reasons when you read the credits. But I also think that's why, you know, Jenna Ortega's character gets locked in the basement, because she does not like blondes.
Yes. No, it was, well, it's one of the brunettes or one of the dark hair girls. So let me get one down there. And if it's not the right one. Yeah.
At least we still got a brunette, because my heart. Yeah.
But that's the thing. Like, I want more of that. And again, I still really like the movie. And Megan, I am confident in my 4-star rating. I was walking out like, it's a 3.5 or a 4. I don't really know. But it's that aspect of the basement is something I want more information on. And I feel like we're going to get that in the prequel. But I'm conflicted with that, because I'm just like,
but here's why I disagree with you that was the case, because again, this goes back to being lucky enough to having spoken with him after the premiere, is he did not have this in mind. He wrote the prequel, like, I don't know at what point of the process, it was either post-production or whatever, but he was like collaborating with Mia Goth on this prequel. And so I don't know that he had this fully formed, like, because you can't bank on A24 being like, this is a rare thing that they went ahead and let him do too. So, you know, he's got an idea for a planned trilogy, and it's all based on different, you know, eras. But I think that this was just, here's a simple idea, and it's up to you to kind of dissect some of these characters further. Here's what I've given you. We just lucked out that A24 was like, here you go, here's money. And he and Mia Goth worked on forming Pearl more fully.
Right.
Yeah, and I think if we didn't know there was a prequel, we might not also feel like there's as many gaps, you know, because I do think it sets up, this is similar to what we were talking about earlier with like the characters you become so invested in, it spends so much time with them that you want more of them. And I think it's similar to this, where we actually get quite a bit of humanizing and emotional background to the the villains of the film more than we often do in a slasher. And so we actually want more. Like we're fed breadcrumbs, which can be kind of scary to only get the breadcrumbs, but we actually want to know more. He gives us a lot to dissect, to analyze about them, and we kind of understand their very base motivations. But I am very curious to know how Pearl got there.
Right.
She killed people when she was younger. What is her deal? Other than we know she was a dancer and she's kind of lost some of her mobility and beauty and youth. But I'm like, what was she doing when she was dancing? I want to know.
You nailed it, because we don't dissect. We don't care what we got enough about Jason Voorhees. He's a mommy's boy. He drowns. Like, we don't really want to know what happened to him, you know, in the ages like leading up to 13 or whatever. Or you take like almost any slasher killer.
I want to know, but
I mean, like,
I know what you mean though. We're satisfied
gives you so
with
much
the explanation as it is.
And you still want more. Speaks a lot to the movie, I think.
I guess I want a scene, and y'all can call me fucking sick and twisted if you want, but like, I guess I want a scene where we see Pearl doing something with either the body in the basement or with Maxine chained in the basement so she can escape. So I can see what she does to these bodies. And I get that like spells out and it makes very explicit things that are implicit in the film, but I still want to see it.
You know how sometimes they're like, you know, you take a while before you show like the beast because it's scarier in your head. I think this is one of those things where I'm okay with it remaining in my head.
And you don't, but you don't think that we're gonna get the origin of Pearl's sex dungeon basement in the fucking prequel? Because that's absolutely what that is being saved for. Is we're gonna have Pearl learning to use a human sex toy in her cellar.
We're getting the loved ones. We're getting the loved ones.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I don't know that it would be that simple with him.
Maybe not.
I feel like that moment. I mean, that moment where she's dancing in front of the bloodied headlights cast in red glow in a different world. To me, I did too.
That was better than the Joker dance. Like, come on.
I kind of feel like that's where he's going, like this vaudevillian lunatic. And I don't think I mean, maybe we will get that, but I kind of feel like he's going to give us something completely unexpected.
I need totally vaudevillian lunatic to be on like the premise, like the log line for Pearl. Who becomes a vaudevillian lunatic.
I think I might be the outlier here and the one that doesn't think that there's a need for a prequel at all, I guess.
Go ahead.
I feel like, okay, take this with a huge grain of salt, because I'm a Halloween 6 fan, which means that I am into the one story that no one likes, that explains
I love
everything. And so I'm into it. Yeah, I love it. So, you know, huge grain of salt. But I also feel like as a Lynch fan, I love films that don't explain shit to me and just leave things as they are and let me figure it out. And if I can't figure it out, well, that's on me, isn't it? But I like that aspect as it applies to X with regards to the homeboy tied up in the basement.
Yeah.
I don't need to see anything else. I know. I can imagine what happened, and I don't have to see it. That said, I trust Ty West to do a prequel. Right. And when it comes out, I'm gonna watch it.
And that preview that accompanies the movie at the end does not seem like that's where it's going to me. It seems like you're getting something completely like a West's crazy brain, which I'm Anya, totally there.
But I'm a sucker. I'm a sucker. I don't like prequels in general because I think I never want to look in the past to explain things. I always want to move forward to see where the characters that I know and love are like going next. That being said, I am a sucker for like entries in a franchise that take completely different aesthetic approaches. Yes. And that does seem to be what Pearl is going to do. I mean, Pearl, I mean, 100%. It's like a technicolor, like vibrant dream. And so that aside, I'm very much excited for it. I'm also just like, I feel like it's going, I mean, all right. To bring it back to Texas Chainsaw, look at Texas Chainsaw, the beginning, right? Like, it exists solely to answer questions that no one gave a shit about before. Like, how did Arlie Ermey lose his teeth? How did Leatherface get born? How did that man lose his legs? No one gives a fuck about these things.
Oh, yeah. Okay. I was trying to remember which one the beginning was.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I hope, my hope, and I have faith in Ty West because I have yet to see a movie of Ty West that I'm like, that wasn't good.
Yeah.
Is that he doesn't fall into that prequel trap of saying, oh, I need to answer how this got here in X. I hope he just treats it as, no, I am just going with Pearl and that is it. And it will lead into X and people can, again, fill in those blanks.
If you look at X at its core, like, which is why it seems so deceptive, straightforward, is that this is him being like, I've never done a slasher before. I want to do a slasher, but I really want to bury my adoration and respect and love of the craft of filmmaking into this slasher. And it's set in the 70s. So you're going to rewind to 1918. Well, what kind of influences is that going to do? And where will that go? And I think that that's kind of the core of where he's going, which is why I'm operating of the assumption that Pearl will not be anything remotely like X.
And I know he's not doing like German expressionism, but if he could do some Caligari shit, like
you can never go wrong with Caligari. A couple of Dutch angles here and there, you know, like just sprinkle it in for some spice.
Vaudevillian lunatic, I will tickle your taint, Trace Thurman. That's the quote. Go.
What I'm hoping for. I'm hoping for sort of a Grey Garden situation with Pearl. Ooh. Yeah, right? Fucking right? A Grey Garden situation. I just said the magic word.
Grey Gardens, like you got the gay.
It's already built in.
I do, while we're on this topic of Pearl, I think we have to talk about the casting of Mia Goth as both Maxine Minks, the lead of the film, as well as Pearl. Yeah. So doing old people makeup on young people for some reason has been very popular in the last 5 years. And it's not always done well.
It's better than CGI de-aging.
Like we've talked about, the reasoning makes a lot of sense. Like obviously
they're parallel characters.
They're exactly. And you know, Pearl sees herself in Maxine. So it's quite a literal translation of that feeling. And did you know ahead of time that she was cast as that character? Did you find out later? Did you feel like when you're watching it, like, is that a person in like obviously in makeup, because somebody of that age and physical condition would not be able to be on a film set? But
the entire time I'm like, this has got to be somebody. This has got to be somebody, to the point where I was scouring the end credits for that reason.
It's the first one.
It's the first one. And I was literally like, Trace.
Yeah.
And I was like, I don't like. I was like, this is someone in makeup. I just don't know who it is. But I thought it was going to be like a secret famous actress that wasn't in the movie, like that was coming into this.
The key is the lips. You had to look at the lips. That little pout Mia Goth has, it's still there. The prosthetic couldn't fuck with that. It's still there. The cheekbones are all covered. Even the jawline, she's got like some jowls going and stuff like that. And I was looking real close. Once I figured it out, I was looking real close at her to see the freckles. The freckles are still there. She still has them, but they look a little more like liver spots. But they're there. They're there. So take that as you will. But I didn't know going in, and so I spent the first like half hour after that character is introduced, kind of just like,
who is? Yeah, I did not until the end.
That ain't an old lady. That's someone in prosthetics. I'm trying to figure it out, but like not to the detriment of the movie. It's not like the prosthetics were done poorly or anything like that. But I was definitely figuring out that wasn't. That's not Alice Krieg. That's not. That's definitely someone who's wearing some latex, and I'm staring at those eyes forever.
A question for all of you then: were y'all not bothered per se, but like the fact that this is an elderly character where he could have cast an elderly actress, and he does decide to cast a younger actress in prosthetic makeup? And I get it. Like, I mean, like, we eventually go to the prequel, whenever that came to fruition. But this is a role that could have gone to any elderly actress.
But it couldn't have, because that defeats his thematic point of the character coveting over this person. Like, she wants this one specifically because it's so much her in her youth. And I think that that's why you have literally one actress playing the two roles. And if you had just cast, like Alice Krieg, it wouldn't have that same kind of impact.
Trace, are you more asking from the perspective of like, I think like we all understand thematically why he does it and like the rationale, but it's more like women, once they reach a certain age, typically are not frequently cast in films, and there's a huge dearth of elderly, especially with women, elderly actresses on screen, or even women over 50. Like just any once you get a little bit of wrinkles, suddenly you have to be the mom in the background, or whatever it might be. So was your question more along those lines of like, is this a missed opportunity to kind of cast?
It was a combination of that, and I will give credit to my podcast co-host Joe Lipsett, because he loves to come in here and like tell me like, well, you should think about this too. And I was like, oh yeah. It was so.
Hi Joe.
Without like putting words in his mouth, he was like, I was a little bothered by the way that the film presents elderly sexuality in a way that seems to be grotesque, in a way that's meant to make the audience feel like repulsed in a certain way. And I was like,
I guess I don't. I feel differently.
I feel differently.
So my response was, I was like, to me, it was more so, I'm filming my younger characters having sex like this. Why shouldn't I do the same thing to my older characters and film them in an equally like sensual and sexual way? The wrinkle in my response to that comes in with, but you cast a younger actress to be the older character. So it's not real elderly bodies. Well, I don't know about Harold, but like that we're looking at in this scene. But also at the same time, it's like, but how much of that is the audience walking in with, ew, gross old people? Because I don't think Wes films it in a way that's gross. I think he's filming it in the exact same way he films his younger sex scenes. So it's up to the audience then.
They're tenderly in love. Like, good for her.
It's presented as sweet.
Yeah. That's go for it. You'll say it better.
I'll try. I'm like 2 margaritas in, like. All right. So I think that it does the way that it subverts the monstrous old person trope is that the elderly body is only presented as grotesque to these people in the movie. It's not really presented as grotesque to us, the audience. But the audience, depending on who they are, especially if they're younger, will still find it grotesque no matter what. But the older people in the audience, maybe those 30 and older who are starting to get the stretch marks and the sags and the crow's feet here and there, they're going to be more understanding, and they're going to be like, well, time marches on, like that's how it is. Like, are they supposed to stop being horny once they reach 60,
Yeah.
But a younger person probably won't understand that, which led to a really great conversation, which was probably awkward for my son, between the two of us, about intimacy and how that can actually, that can stay as you get older. There's no hard end date for that. Yeah. You might still want to fuck when you're older. Can we say fuck on this podcast?
Yes. I've said it a lot.
Yes, Tracy said that, talked about buttholes. I think we're good. But this does remind me, there was a question I did want to ask all of you. Is there a mixed message here, though? On one hand, it seems to be saying, sexuality is for everyone, right? And it can be beautiful. It can also not look like the way it does in porn, and this film certainly represents that. But it also, there does seem to be a message. It's also like, hey, this older woman's sexuality is dangerous. Like, it's the villain of the film. It's the driver. It's like the catalyst for the horror in it. So that part of me is like, well, I guess from a literal translation, you could say it isn't so sex positive for an older woman, but I don't think that was the intent. And I think there's multiple readings there, but I can definitely see someone making that argument with this film.
Definitely.
My read is, again, this is from a filmmaker who wrote it, who's reckoning with his own aging, which is something as we get older that we all, so you apply a horror kind of layer to that. And then, so I don't really necessarily think that that's the takeaway or the intended messaging so much as like, this is a reflection of somebody trying to reckon with their own aging process. And that's why, to answer, go back to what Trace was saying about not casting an older actress, like it wouldn't apply in this scenario, because it is more about coming to terms with aging and how that manifests with, you know, intimacy and otherwise. But it just so happens to be a horror movie, and so we're gonna bleed over into the violence.
Sure.
Yeah, ageism is definitely a thing in Hollywood, but in this particular case, this very specific case,
Right,
it makes sense. It's like that line in It's a Wonderful Life. Like, I watch It's a Wonderful Life every Christmas Eve without fail. And there's this part in the movie where Jimmy Stewart is about to make out with Donna Reed, but he's too much kind of like a little punk to do it. And this old guy who's watching from the porch, he's like, youth is wasted on the wrong people. Yeah. That is the entire premise of X. Youth is wasted on the wrong people. And it feels like the old couple, Pearl in particular, it's not so much that she that her sexuality is presented as monstrous as it is she's still repressed because she can't bone her own husband. She still doesn't get that attention. She doesn't get the intimacy that comes along with the sexual part of the relationship. And she clearly still wants that. She still clearly desires that. And that cutoff for her, I think, is what made her it was what motivated a lot of the killings. Along with covetousness.
I think also, and I'll like make a parallel to like the queer killer trope. It's we're in the horror genre, so someone has to be the bad guy. And while I always think it's okay to critique, discuss, whatever, be like, well, why is this person the killer? That's not really the representation we want as a minority group. And not to say the elderly is a minority group, but there's stuff there.
In Hollywood.
An underrepresented group.
Yes, there you go.
Describe them.
And so even when it comes to the queer killer, when I'm like, oh, well, like, what? I'm like, well, you know what? As someone who has been discriminated against for part of their lives, and y'all as women and like whatever other groups y'all can be a part of can probably agree. I was like, I get it. I'd probably kill someone too. so when it comes
horny and I'm tired of it.
And so put it like going into Pearl's shoes, and I'm like, I mean, yeah, fuck. Like you are a sexual being. You want to have sex. You love the husband you're with, but you're also in 1979. Spent the last couple decades probably around people who were like, ew, gross, you're old, but look at us, fuck. Jealousy builds, resentment builds, whatever. So while I don't think it's a problem to discuss and critique that aspect and be like, well, yeah, is this the representation we want? At the same time, realistically, I'm like, yeah, but I kind of get it.
Yeah.
We're also very,
go ahead.
I was just gonna say, we're also very messy. Like, we're flawed and we should be allowed to be messy and flawed. You know, I look at this specific, you know, motivation behind Pearl killing is a subversion of, you know, slashers in the 80s were all about you have sex and you die for a very like Reagan morality sake. Well, you have sex and you die because she's envious and she wants that. And that's a little bit liberating. And I think that, yeah, that could raise some, you know, problematic or elements or room for critiques, but at the same time, the core, you know, like you take the good with the bad. And yeah.
Remember, this movie is set in 1979. So that previous Pearl's generation did not have the sexual freedom that this generation had, which is a huge source of the tension there.
And bringing that even back to queer culture, I'm just like, well, yeah, I mean, look at all these gay men who grew up in the 70s and 80s, and now they have, like, we as a community have Grindr, Scruff, like whatever the fuck app you want. Like, if I was a gay, a 30-year-old in the 70s, I would actually feel fucking pissed off. I'd be like, you kids have all these tools at your disposal. And not to say it's easy to be gay or queer now, but it's easier than it was back then. And I would absolutely hold some resentment. I'd be like, fuck, like that sucks. And then these men who were like 30 in the 70s are on the apps and get treated like shit because they're old.
Yeah. Yep. And I think that's, again, where the casting comes back. It's about putting yourself in the other person's shoes a bit. And I think this film does that very effectively in multiple ways, right? And that's a big part of Mia Goth being, like, it is a reflection of her. It's another version of herself, just, you know, however many years later, 60 years later. And, you know, with Jenna Ortega's character deciding, like, kind of a role reversal, like, I want to experience what you're experiencing. I want to try that. It's about, you know, people putting themselves in another perspective.
Empathy.
Empathy. Oh yes,
Empathy.
empathy in a horror film.
It's almost like
would've
horror
thought?
films are.
So we have time for one more question, and it's just a fun, quick one. Is what was your favorite kill in the movie?
Oh shit. Okay, I'm gonna
Go.
hit one really quick. The Fulci kill, the kill with the eyes, the
Mhm.
pitchfork through the face, which is very, very, Fulci, Lucio Fulci for the uninitiated. He likes to punish people for looking. And no matter what they do, if they're looking through keyholes, if they're looking through the hell are those
Walls.
things called? Yeah, they're looking through walls or looking through whatever, they are going to be punished for it somehow right here. And so it was great to see that kill, and it's great to see it. You saw it coming. As soon as he stepped into there in his underwear, you saw like he's not walking out of there alive.
But the edit, when we move to the next scene, which is Jenna
Yeah.
Ortega in the cellar, and she's like, goes up, door's locked, oops, let me pull the light. And then it's like, and then we cut back to the pitchfork. And I was like, that scene was over. We shouldn't have to be cutting back to this scene right now.
Right. It's almost his own version of a jump scare.
Yes.
It's great.
Yes, the editing.
Through the
techniques.
editing.
Yes, the brilliant.
David Kashevarov.
Yes,
On my
and
cheat
Ty
sheet.
West. They
Yes.
work together. Ty West typically edits his own films. So when the credits were coming at the beginning, it was like written, directed, produced by Ty West. I'm like, oh, he didn't edit, and then I saw he co-edited.
He co-edited it, yeah.
Yep. How
Megan,
about
go
you,
ahead.
Trace? Oh
No. I'll go
whoever.
last. Like, you take the next pick.
Okay. Obviously there's so many that I'm going to yeah, I mean, I think Anya probably nailed it, but to totally differentiate, I'm going to go with the husband who foreshadowed his own death, and it was such a kind of comedic but heartbreaking. Yeah.
Heartbreaking.
Heartbreaking. Yeah.
I mean, it is a literal killer jump scare.
Yeah. That
Up.
I feel like, when you have all these gory creative deaths, that's the one that you kind of didn't anticipate.
Mm-hmm. My favorite kill is the Brittany Snow kill, just because I was like, cool, give me a fucking death roll with this crocodile. However, the best filmed murder, I actually think the film peaks early. I think RJ, with his blood splattering on the headlight,
and making it red.
As he basically gets partially decapitated as she goes to town. I think that is wonderful. A wonderful kill scene. Like that.
I love them.
It's
Oh,
so
that's
good.
great. And
that is when it reminded me of The Town That Dreaded Sundown. Right there. That's when I got The Town That Dreaded Sundown is right here.
Yeah,
There was a
I can
split
see that.
diopter right in that scene somewhere. And
Ooh.
oh my God.
Yes. But
Right? Are you a
Becky,
sucker for split diopters?
Always.
Ever since at some point, the day that I learned what it was and I saw it in a movie, I was like, and now it seems like everyone does it, but nevertheless, I don't care because it's awesome.
Yeah, it was popular in a particular, like in the 70s.
Well, De Palma did it a lot too, but it's
yeah.
I want to know what Becky's favorite kill is, though.
Yes.
Oh yes, I will tell you. So RJ, I'm split a little bit between RJ's kill, because also I'm a sucker for Blue Oyster Cult and Don't Fear the. I love any use of that song.
It's on the nose, but it works.
But it's in Halloween. It's in Scream. And then I think Rob Zombie's Halloween uses a cover of it as well. It's all over the place. But I love that song, and it was just. I think it tied everything together beautifully, and it was by far the goriest kill. But I think actually Jenna Ortega Lorraine's character is my favorite, because it was shocking.
I did not see that coming.
Yeah.
Not at that moment. Not at that moment.
I'm a sucker for those kind of the Final Destination bus hit is one of my favorites. Like the simplicity of it.
The second she was like, "You're crazy. I'm not done." Oh, bitch, you are dead. You are so dead.
But you didn't expect it to be like that, though.
No,
so
for sure.
sudden.
Took her face off. And I think too, as a whole, the slasher element, I really was like, okay, well, this is following if we're going to go Texas Chainsaw, it's like, okay, one of them goes off, gets killed, goes off, gets killed, goes off, gets killed, goes off, gets killed, blah, blah, blah. I really did want something of either a chase, a modern sensibility, I guess, if you will, of the slasher genre, like a chase scene, or two of them teaming up to be like, let's go do this thing.
Yeah.
But that's not the time period we're doing here, right?
And we're also working with an old couple that can't really.
Yeah, they can't take on two of them at a time.
Exactly. You have to use a lot more surprise. Well, that concludes the
you're gonna
roundtable.
You're gonna make Pearl work harder. Yay!
So who knows? Maybe we'll be back here later this year talking about Pearl, because it may come out this year actually, because it's already in the can, and I think the score is going to be done in May. So maybe we'll do a version 2 of this down the road.
See if it fills those holes.
Yes. So if anyone enjoyed this, please subscribe to the Paper Street Pictures YouTube channel so you can catch future roundtables.
Wouldn't it be great if we could do that
Maybe
at like
Pearl?
Fantastic Fest?
Ooh.
This actually did feel like I was arguing with people in the lobby. I love this. This was great.
Awesome. That's the idea, right? Is to replicate that.
The only thing that was missing was that normally everyone's on their phones trying to get that tweet out real quick. You know?
Yeah.
Been
They want
there.
to be the first one.
Yeah, you got to get those pull quotes out, you know?
Oh man. Well, because now they fucking put tweets in fucking TV spots
They do.
from Joe Blow. I mean, actually Joe Blow, not the website.
Oh, I was like, what?
No. Joe somebody.
Awesome. So you can find other episodes of the Paper Street Pictures podcast on this channel, as well as a few other roundtables. And for our guests, you can find links to their stuff in the notes in the description below. And thank you, Anya, Megan, and Trace. A pleasure, as always.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Fun.
This was super fun. Let's do it again.
Yes.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.